This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning all and welcome to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag London Housing for this meeting. Please I remind you to silence your electronic devices and for members to position themselves closer to the mics because sometimes the mics pick up irregularly, and if you can move it towards yourself by picking up the whole unit and not using the gooseneck pits because it pops out on you. Our main item of business this morning is the outrun of Affordable Housing Programme 2016 to 2023. Can I now ask our clerk, Diane Richards, if we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies for absence have been received.
Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out in item 2 and ask if any members have any other interests to declare? Can we note the completion and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings?
Agreed.
Noted. Thank you. This brings us to the main item of business, the Affordable Homes Programme 2016 to 2023. I'd like to welcome our guests, Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, Tim Steer, Executive Director, Housing and Land, Greater London Authority. Heather Juman, am I pronouncing that correctly? Juman, yeah. Assistant Director, Housing and Land, GLA. And Tejmina Jeffra, Head of Programme Management, Housing and Land for the GLA. Good morning to you all. Thank you for your attendance. At this point, I normally jump straight to the end and get told off, but I've remembered to stop today. As is the tradition on most committees in City Hall, as a chair, I'll be asking the first question. So I'll address this to the Deputy Mayor, and of course, at any point, if anybody wants to chime in, and Tom's an old hand, he'll bring you in if he feels he needs to. What have you learned from the affordable housing programme that you expect to address differently in the 2021 to 2026 programme?
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Good morning, Chair. And I'm really pleased to be with you here today to discuss this topic. And the first thing that I want to do is once again reflect on the achievement of getting to 116,000 affordable homes and hitting that target. I think it's a huge credit to my colleagues, the colleagues that are here on the panel today, but also the whole of the Housing and Land Directorate, as well as our partners, whether they be housing associations or councils, who really have risen to the challenge in incredibly difficult circumstances. As you know, since this programme was agreed, we've faced multiple crises. Most recently, of course, we've had rising interest rates, rising materials costs, the war in Ukraine, adding to Brexit, the building safety crisis, addressing the challenge of retrofit. These each individually would be very significant challenges to face, but collectively they have made housing delivery enormously difficult. And of course the Mayor, it has to be said, almost made the task harder for himself by ditching the previous Mayor's definition, dodgy definition of affordable housing, and moving us much more towards a sensible definition of affordable housing, and particularly a renewed focus on social rent. I want to concentrate on three main areas in terms of, I suppose, learning and my reflections on how we managed to achieve the target and what is being learned in terms of the 21-26 programme. And then, if I may, I'll pass over to my colleagues, some of which have worked, of course, on multiple programmes under several different mayors and previously before housing was devolved to City Hall, so they do bring a wealth of experience. The first area I would highlight would be diversity of providers and capacity building. Members of this committee will have heard me say many times during this programme that we were leaving no stone unturned in terms of delivering starts, and that was absolutely the case. So by setting up the Building Council Homes for Londoners programme, which was the £1 billion fund, which specifically targeted funding towards councils, and through things like the Home Building Capacity Fund, which helped the councils to build up their internal capacity, we are delivering a golden era of council housing, and this is a marked departure with the rest of the country. We had, the Mayor, as you know, has exceeded his 20,000 council homes target and delivered more than 23,000 council housing starts since 2018. The same is not the case outside of London, it has to be said, and I think this is an area where devolution has shown real benefits, and the focusing through funding and through policy on councils has opened up the affordable housing sector, opened it back up, I should say, because of course councils used to be the traditional providers of social housing and builders of social housing in this country, opened up a whole new area, and of course through right to buyback as well. We've also been working with non-traditional RPs, what are called private RPs. We don't treat them in exactly the same way as traditional RPs. We do some additional due diligence on those partners to ensure that they are delivering in a way that's going to be long-term and sustainable. But we have been working with private RPs, which is a growing part of the sector. I think it's fair to say that with all the other challenges that I've highlighted, and particularly I think in the context of the building safety crisis, I don't think that traditional RPs alone had this program perhaps operated without a focus on council housing, I don't think that they would have necessarily had the capacity to get us up to that 116k target. The second thing I want to talk about is relationships, and this is absolutely crucial. The area teams and my colleagues here have very, very close relationships and detailed relationships with our partners in London, are absolutely on top of their programs and each scheme within those programs. And where there are challenges and problems that cannot be resolved simply with officer intervention, we had a process of escalation whereby schemes would come to me. I would have necessary conversations perhaps with council leaders or with chief execs of housing associations, and we would find a way through. And if I wasn't able to solve the problem, we also had a process of escalation within the wider mayor's office in order to deal with challenges as well. And internal working within City Hall was absolutely crucial too, not just between housing and land and the mayor's office, but particularly with GLA planning colleagues. Our planning colleagues really did a fantastic job of working with us to ensure that we could hit that deadline, that things that were coming through the planning system were dealt with properly and dealt with swiftly. And I want to recognise that and say a big thank you to Jules Pipe, to Lucinda Turner, and to the whole of the GLA planning team for the way that they engaged with us. And there are internal things within housing and land changes that were made as well, things like introducing an operational policy team to help embed new and emerging policy without disrupting delivery. And I think perhaps my colleagues may talk a bit more about that in a moment. And the relationship with the government was really crucial as well, and with DLUC. Now, obviously, the political relationship is not always easy when you've got a mayor of one political colour and a government and Secretary of State of a different political colour. And let's be honest about that. I think that relationship definitely improved under Michael Gove. We had a bit of an alignment, really, where he wanted to focus more on social rent in a way that his predecessors didn't, which, of course, is something the mayor wants to focus on. So I think we had an improved relationship at a political level. But also, crucially, we had, I think, a much improved relationship at officer level as well, which I think my colleagues will come on to talk to. The final area I just want to highlight before passing over to colleagues is the value of the relentless focus on the target and on the deadline. That focus on the deadline, no let up. No suggestion of, we don't get the deadline, we can just slip it. No, absolutely. 31st of March, get it in there or you don't get the funding. And that really, really focused the minds of our partners. It really, really incentivised them to work with us to problem solve and to get that delivery in, because if they didn't, these schemes would not be funded. So I will leave it there, and I think there'll probably be things we want to come back to, or additional things as well. I'd like to pass over to Tim
before Tim comes in. I just want to just push it a little bit more detail. You talked about new relationships, better relationships with a new type of provider, new RP. Is that an innovation? Do you believe that didn't exist before you sort of came into role? Is it something quite new?
So private RPs are a growing part of the market. I think that we did have relationships with them in the past, but I think that they were much smaller than they are now. They've become a growing part of the housing sector in terms of delivery of affordable housing. So I think that's partly us going out and being very proactive in terms of our engagement with them and with the wide range of other partners. And it also reflects the fact that they are a growing part of the affordable housing sector, both in London and nationally.
Thank you. And you talked about different newer systems within the GLA itself, and it seems like you're talking about a slightly different culture. Are you happy that culture is now embedded and that learning is there to stay? Because the original question of what you've learned from doing this programme that you'll transport into the next programme, is that part of it? And if so, how do you intend to hold on to those new relationships, those new structures?
Yes, I think that way of working is going to continue, particularly in terms of the sort of process of escalation that I talked about, where there are schemes that might be tricky, there may be planning issues, there may be other issues, and then having that way of escalating and and having those sort of high-level discussions with the leaders of the various other organisations. There are other parts of learning as well, which I think my colleagues on the panel will talk about in terms of some of the structural changes. I think it'd be interesting to hear from Tim in particular, because of course Tim came in partway through the programme as exec director, and I think we'll have some reflections on what he saw when he came in and things like that. But yeah, I think that the changes that were made under this programme, we've learned a lot from that. That will be taken forward. Also acknowledging that the new programme is a different programme anyway in terms of some of the requirements around it that the government set.
Okay, well, over to you, Tim.
Thank you. Thanks, Dom, and thanks, Chair. Yeah, just very brief comments, really, because unlike my colleagues, I am quite new to the Directorate, and I started in my role in July. And I suppose two really key observations when I started were, A, just quite how sophisticated the programme management approach was and is in the Directorate, and B, which is really important to your question, is the ability of the team to learn as it goes, because the 16 to 23 programme was a long programme. It started out in a particular way, and much of that was set out in an MOU with government. But along the way, the approach to delivering that was really honed by the team, and it's very effective, the team, in terms of learning as it goes and then embedding those changes to the culture, as I mentioned. But yeah, I think in terms of the programme management approach, it is very sophisticated. It's very much designed around getting the balance right between it's very much designed around minimising risk in the programme, making sure that schemes that we think are going to come forward do come forward, and if schemes aren't coming forward in the way that we think they are, to intervene and get in there early to work with partners, or potentially to allocate funding elsewhere. And it is really around those relationships with the delivery partners which allows that to happen. We've got a portfolio-based approach in the area teams, which allows area managers to really develop deep relationships with partners, really understand in an honest way the specifics of schemes, and that's been absolutely crucial in programme managing the thing effectively. And at a high level, it's really about getting the balance. Partners need certainty in order to be able to deliver these big programmes. They need to understand what resources are going to be available to them. So we want to try and give them as much certainty as possible. But on the other hand, we need to be agile, and we can't have a situation where partners are not delivering against allocations and we're not able to reallocate that elsewhere. And I think getting that balance right is the thing which is really become clearer as the 16 to 23 programme has continued, and that's the thing which we'll take into the 21 to 26 programme. And just finally for me, on the department relationship with officials, I think that really has improved over the last year. There was a real sense, I think, I think the NAO work, which I know you're interested in, was really helpful here. There was a real sense that this was that it was a joint objective for us to deliver this programme. The department itself was under scrutiny for its delivery of the programme, and I think that did enable, as the year went on and as the programme really got to the business end, it really did enable better and better joint working between us and the officials in the department, really honest understanding of the risks on the programme, and clear understanding of the mitigations for those risks, and that was what allowed us to negotiate some of the flexibilities which we were able to negotiate towards the end of the programme, which enabled us to safeguard these schemes even as the situation in the market got harder and harder and harder.
Thank you. Just a quick sort of almost supplementary really to the Deputy Mayor. You talk about strong relationships and they seem to have delivered for you. Is there a mechanism to form new relationships? Because one of the worries is you get such a sort of cabal of people who've been effective for you, you keep going back to them. But is there have you been thinking about a way to make sure the door is open to new providers who fit your requirement?
Yes, absolutely, and I will go and meet new providers. I'm contacted by new players who come into the sector. We want to encourage proactively. It's in all of our interest to have a diversity of providers. Yes. It's something that served us very well in the 1623 programme, and it's something that we want to continue going forward.
Okay, thank you. Let me move on to my second question. Are you confident that the 2016-23 Affordable House Programme has delivered the right kinds of homes in the areas in London with the most need?
Chair, yes, I think the 16 to 23 programme has delivered homes across the whole of London. Obviously, in terms of where homes are delivered, that will partly be reflective of partner appetite in those areas. It will also be reflective as well of a local planning context. As you know, some boroughs are much more keen on development than other boroughs. So all of these things come into play. I think the fact that we have been funding councils to the degree that we have also has helped in terms of ensuring that we get a wide range or a housing developed across a wide range of London, because these are boroughs that have their own programmes. They're very, very incentivised to get them delivered. And I think we have a programme now with every single borough in London that has a housing revenue account, and there are some boroughs that don't have housing revenue accounts that are actively working to try and recreate them and to work with us for funding as well. So I think all of this has helped us to ensure that we're getting housing, across a wide range of London, acknowledging that there are sometimes local circumstances in some boroughs that don't always make it easy.
What about the mix of housing? Because a criticism could be you've provided the number of housing. We'll get into that, but there's a heavy slant to a particular type of housing, and family housing in London is rare and becoming rarer relatively. So, what would you say to that challenge that you could have and should do more to provide family type units, 3, 4 bedrooms, etc.?
So I think that we obviously want to be providing family-sized housing and a diverse range of housing. The challenge, of course, is that we have a limited pot of money, and there's no premium that is placed by the government in terms of weighting funding towards homes with more bedrooms. So I guess what I'm saying to you is the more funding that we have, the more funding that government makes available, the easier it would be for us to provide family-sized housing. But within that 116,000, there are going to be thousands of 3-bed plus homes for families. Within that,
do you know the proportion?
I think it's. I think 3-bed plus across the whole of the programme is 25%. So you're talking several tens of thousands of family-sized homes through that programme. If we want to get more family-sized housing, though, we've got to get more funding out of the government. I think the fact we've been funding councils as well has helped us on family-sized housing, because boroughs are very heavily incentivised, more I think than housing associations, to deliver family-sized housing, because it's boroughs that have the duty, the homelessness duty, and they need to house they need to house families. So I think if you look at borough delivery, they're very incentivised to deliver 3, 4, 5-bed properties.
As Deputy Mayor, I suppose you can always point to the government and ask for more and say, they could do more.
Well, we need it.
Yeah, I might even agree, Tom. but is there something you, the Mayor, could be doing? Couldn't it be a bigger priority for you? Is there something that you could do within the bounds of your rules, your scope, to do more about family housing?
So the Mayor obviously requires boroughs through their planning policies to set a housing size mix within their local plans. So the Mayor's using his planning levers in order to do that. I've already highlighted the focus on council housing, and councils, as I say, as providers, are heavily incentivised to provide family-sized housing because of the challenges that they face. But it's very, very difficult. Although I should say, by the way, it's not just me and the Mayor saying that we need more funding. The sector itself is arguing very, very hard that we need more funding for affordable housing as well, particularly at the moment, given that the cross-subsidy model is simply, well, I don't think it was ever delivering to the degree that we would want it to, but it's certainly not delivering in the current economic context.
Thank you. I'll be surprised if you don't ask for more money, Tom. That is literally your job, I imagine. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. Good morning, Tom, and good morning to everybody else. I just wanted to kind of reflect on your opening remarks. Obviously that target of 116,000, there was some scepticism from some, it has to be said, not on this side of the circle, that we'd meet that. But we've also met the 20,000 council homes target, which is really, really important and vital. And we'll have some questions later on about the geographic spread, about which particular boroughs those homes are. But Just really specifically, just kind of asking you, how did the GLA start the 25,658 homes in 2022-23? It may be for you or for Tim, Heather, or Tajmina.
So again, how did we start?
Yes. You talked about the economic challenges facing the sector.
Yes, thank you, Assembly Member Moema. So yes, this was always going to be the hardest year within the programme, as I would say is generally the case. I think is always the case. These programmes are like a hockey stick, so delivery, it tends to be weighted very much at the end of the year. So there was a lot riding on this year. I think in response to your question, I'd reflect again on some of the things I said in my opening remarks. Firstly, and as Tim highlighted, there was a very, very strong setup within the directorate itself, with the area teams, the programme team, supported by our housing policy team and other parts of the directorate. Having the area teams having those relationships with partners, being absolutely on top of schemes, detailed knowledge of all the risks and the challenges associated with those, the milestones that partners are expected to meet along the way, and then looking if there were issues that arose, as they often do, how we can mitigate any risks and deal with those problems. Then, if that can't be dealt with between officers and the partner, if some more sort of political intervention is required, coming to me, coming to the Mayor's office in order to work through that. And a really, a large part of my year last year, it was meeting with council leaders, meetings with housing association chief executives, meeting with bodies like the G15 and groups like that, just to try and problem solve and to drive things forward. And I think that was a crucial part of it, and to reiterate again, as Tim said, the program management side of this is an incredibly complex program. Making those decisions about how you direct the funding that you've got within the envelope that you've got, in order to take into account the various challenges and additional costs that are now being thrown at all of our delivery partners without breaking the bank. It was a very, very, very careful and difficult balancing act, but it's paid off. And as I say, I think that's an incredible achievement. I'd pass on to colleagues now.
Just a couple of things to add. One is that, as Tom says, through the programme management we did throughout the year, we knew the performance of certain partners against others. We did take out some projects that we knew weren't going to deliver in order to be able to reallocate them. And through our discussions and negotiation with government, we also achieved some sort of flexibilities where we had perhaps a range target, which gave us the confidence then to go and negotiate on where specific projects did need a little bit of additional funding for safeguarding to keep them in the programme. We were able to agree that, which was a huge benefit. And the one area that really, to an extent took me by surprise, is that I think we thought that partners would keep bringing us sort of programme building new opportunities, perhaps up to Christmas, and then perhaps that would sort of drop away as they focused on achieving their existing targets. But in fact, our partners went well above and beyond, especially given the context, and they kept bringing us possibilities that we could talk through and negotiate. That was a great credit to the range of partners we were working with.
Thank you. And so I wanted to maybe just flesh out, perhaps, I'm not sure who this would be to, but just to find out how you overcame previously stated problems around inflation and material or labour costs. We've obviously had, not just here, but also at Mayor's Question Time, comments around the 45% increase in materials costs and shortages of labour, particularly post-Brexit. How you've overcome that?
I'm happy to start and then pass over to colleagues. I mean, as Heather mentioned, there was that ability in some cases to provide additional funding to safeguard schemes, and obviously we would require from partners, a lot of evidence to support that, to make sure that we're achieving value for money. We also looked at how we could cash flow as well within the existing allocations that partners had, so ensuring that they were getting the maximum amount possible at start on site to reduce perhaps the amount that they would then go and need to borrow in an intervening period to sort of help with their cash flow and things. So those are two key ways. I'll pass over to colleagues if they've got anything to add.
Some of the other areas that we worked on, that we've mentioned liaising with planning colleagues, but also there are people in the GLA who are working with utility companies, and that was another way that we could intervene and help with additional costs, is to get those people who've got their leverage elsewhere in the GLA to bring on board a better value for money and more. A quicker attachment to the utility networks. So I'm trying to think if there were any others.
Can I just mention that at kind of a broader strategic level, in the whole year, the market position was really developing rapidly, and as you mentioned, construction inflation was a big one, but then interest rates really layered on top of that, and there were other factors which made things really difficult for the sector. And as you said, we were very worried about our ability with the sector to meet that target. But the scale of joint working between the GLA, the housing association partners, the boroughs, as coming together as a sector, really focused on the target, knowing how important the delivery of that target was in terms of acting as house building being a counter-cyclical economic measure. There was just such a focus from the sector on meeting that target and doing whatever partners could do to keep schemes in their investment programs, even when things were difficult. And that did involve some partners taking risks on projects and I think the fact that this program had such a profile, and the fact that people understood that the 21 to 26 program was going to be more constrained and some of the conditions on the program are more difficult to meet, I think that just meant that partners really took every opportunity they could to keep things in this program, knowing that meant that the period afterwards was going to be even more difficult in some ways, because so many schemes had kind of come forward into this programme. But the power of that deadline, as Tom said, just really focused everybody's mind, and the scale of creative thinking and innovation that went on was really incredible, I think.
Just one thing, obviously Tom mentioned the range of partners as well, and the other thing that we saw is that some of the, for example, joint venture partners for some of our larger providers actually did have the clout and capacity in the marketplace to negotiate packages of work at a good value for money, despite the challenges, just because of their position in the marketplace, and they were able to retain their workforce because they had a reputation, which kept those people on site. So it wasn't the case that every single partner faced exactly the same level of construction inflation.
And just to add as well, I think the kind of coming out of COVID and already having those issues there where development sites had sort of slowed down hugely, we were already lobbying the sector and looking at what are the options, what can we do to help you to secure these sites, to bring down the labour shortages, what mechanisms do you need, and having those conversations with central government as well, and then always looking forward to see where are the markets going, what is happening to the way that development sites are actually being funded, so that we can have those conversations about the really larger high risk sites, but also focusing on the individual smaller sites as well, where it could be a smaller delivery partner who needed some additional cash flow. So looking at how we could flex some of the milestones and some of the payment structures that would keep them continuing to work through their developments.
Thank you. And then my final question is in two parts. So just really quickly, what's your estimate for when the 116,000 homes will be completed? And also, what's the focus of the GLA in working with boroughs that are performing the best or the worst? The likes of Kingston, they have the 342 homes completed, and Richmond 258, and you kind of compare that with other boroughs who are delivering much higher numbers of new homes. How are you working through those relationships with boroughs that are perhaps more reticent to engage or are struggling to find sites, whatever reason it might be?
So on your first question, the vast majority are forecast to complete by 2029. There are a couple of schemes that will complete in the early 2030s, I think covering around 2,700 homes. And I think what that reflects is, obviously, the 1623 programme didn't have a long stop deadline. It didn't have a deadline for completions. That was agreed with the government. What that enabled us to do was to fund long-term schemes, and particularly long-term multi-phase estate regeneration schemes. Partners are not going to take the risk on those schemes if they can only secure funding for the first one or two phases, and then may or may not get funding for subsequent phases. So those schemes simply wouldn't come forward, and we would not get the benefit of these new and better homes that, because of our resident ballot requirement, residents have voted for. So that enables us to do that. Because of London's built environment, there is quite a considerable amount of estate regeneration that requires funding. Now, the second part of your question, sorry, please, do you mind repeating? Geographical, yes. Yeah. So I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think if you look at Tower Hamlets, for example, there's a huge amount of housing development in Tower Hamlets. I think you highlighted Richmond, obviously very different type of borough in terms of its built environment and its location. I think you would always expect there to be perhaps differences between certain boroughs with certain characteristics. We obviously want to encourage development as much as we can. But you're always going to have to factor in terms of planning risk, the appetite for development within certain boroughs. Sometimes that might reflect the political makeup of the borough, and I'm not saying that in a party political way, but just the political makeup of the borough. Sometimes it reflects the sort of resident appetite within those boroughs for development. But as I said, we've funded homes in, I think, every single one of London's local authorities, and we always want to work with local authorities to deliver more affordable housing.
If I come in just on completions briefly, because just to note, really, I suppose that partners are just incredibly incentivised to complete schemes. They know that they're not going to realise the income from those schemes until they're completed. And they know that costs just continue to increase the longer schemes go on for. And the other thing to mention is that for the team, the job for 16 to 23 definitely isn't over. Now we've achieved the starts. It's equal amounts of focus on those starts as they go through to completion, and the same kind of intensive work with partners continues as those schemes progress. And it's not until they complete that we make those final grant payments. And if any were not to complete, they would lose that grant, and that would have to go back into the sector in another way. So completion is very much a focus of the team, alongside starts on the 21 to 26 programme too.
Okay. If I could just... It wasn't my final question.
It should be.
I skipped one, sorry.
It does say, if not covered. Do you feel like it's been covered?
Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly push back on something that the Deputy Mayor said, very briefly, which is that I appreciate that there are different demographics and so on with different boroughs, but surely it's the role of the Housing and Land Directorate to make the case that we have housing need everywhere. I think that's my question, rather than just numbers.
Sorry, I hope I didn't suggest that wasn't the case. I want to see development. I want to see all boroughs fulfilling the housing targets they have. All boroughs have housing targets. All boroughs have targets for the amount of affordable housing that they need to deliver. Our job is to support those boroughs in terms of achieving those affordable housing targets. And yes, we will push them very hard. We don't want boroughs to be dragging their feet when the whole of London has a housing crisis.
Can I just give an example? So obviously, my substantive role is as head of the South London area team. So delivery in South London is extremely important to me. And I would say that the team spend as much time working with Richmond and Kingston as they do with all of the other boroughs, trying to make things happen. And a good example of that is in Bromley, where they wanted to reopen their HRA and start a new housing programme. They started with 30 homes, and the team took them through step by step. They went out to the local authority, they trained them in our systems, they unlocked, they sorted out some legal issues, and then we got those 30. And by the end of the programme, they delivered 300 affordable homes from a standing start with the support of the team. So we're absolutely focused on that.
Before I go to Assembly Member Berry, we've had a lot of talk about completions. Is it possible to provide us in writing when and where these phases will be complete? Because
no. So what I'm talking about is when we forecast particular schemes to complete. That's not something that we would publicise, because we don't want to sort of give a running commentary. Circumstances change, particularly in the current volatile environment. So we wouldn't share specific details about specific schemes, but you will, of course, get the completions data that we publish quarterly and annually.
Okay, I'm just very interested in when houses are actually ready for people to move into. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Are you all right for me to ask about acquisitions? I know if you're planning to do anything else with the order of the questions.
Acquisitions, whose questions are acquisitions?
You did, but I mean, I've got follow-ups to it anyway. So
you proceed.
Great, thank you. So obviously, I'm very interested in the Right to Buy Back Fund, which came out of this programme, and also more widely other things you're doing to get new homes into the programme that were not necessarily entirely new builds. So things like conversions of things that are halfway through a scheme. They might be market homes within an overall scheme that you then convert into affordable homes. Can you give us, possibly in writing, that would be the sensible thing to do, the total of the acquisitions that were funded so far in the outturn, and some idea of the nature of those acquisitions, whether they were long ago completed homes or homes that are new builds that have been converted?
Right, so acquisitions, as you say, right to buy back is also something that's very important to me, and I was very proud that we were able to launch that to support delivery in this programme. So I'll bring Tajmina, I think, and Heather in a minute, but we don't necessarily record on our systems whether or not. I don't think we record specifically whether or not. No, we do. Oh, sorry. So let me give you the figures that I've got. So 2022-23, I think we estimate around 10% are acquisitions. That's been falling. So I think for the programme, programme as a whole, since 2016, it's around 14%. It was 16% under Boris Johnson's mayoralty, and it was considerably higher before that, I think around 36%. These are ONS.
Can I clarify also, there's a third category of acquisition, which is acquiring homes that are going to be demolished and then replaced. So that's some of that, is that?
Yeah, so I think we record the acquisitions, whether they're acquisitions in certain cases. I don't think it's a requirement, but I think we have some data on that. We wouldn't record whether or not they were to be demolished or not. Now, you could look at the Right to Buy Back programme, and you can be certain that none of those will be demolished. No,
exactly.
It was a
and the new builds, you're not going to knock those down.
Exactly. So if you look at Right to Buy Back, we've completed, I think, on just over 1,000 and started on just under 1,300. So that's the Right to Buy Back programme, and as I say, none of those can be for demolition. So Tajmina, did you want to come in at all, just on the proportions within the programme?
Yeah, so overall against the 116 target, it's around 14% of acquisitions. Those are a mix, really. We have some that will be existing properties that have been purchased and then will require some work or remodelling to bring them to the type of housing that's needed for the affordable housing sector. There will be some that are market sale flips into affordable housing. It's a mix, really. I think earlier on in the 16-23 programme we had a mix of more of the new build flips from market to affordable housing. Recently, we've had more where there's been conversions and the remodelling, really kind of focusing in on the remodelling and what's required for those. But it has been a mix in the programme.
Are you able to provide us any more just detail of that? I mean, I'd love to know which of each of the categories across the whole programme you've got so far.
I can look into that, yeah.
Great, that would be really, really helpful. And then obviously we're looking at the borough by borough data in our excellent briefing, and Southwark stands out a lot as being a high number of starts and not quite so many completions of social housing, but it's definitely a front runner in terms of the tables. When I looked at demolitions, it was also the highest number of demolitions. So are you able to give us an idea of the net additionality of new affordable homes that have come out of this programme? Your targets weren't net, but obviously that's what matters to Londoners.
So, as I say, we don't record whether or not the homes that are acquired are being demolished, but I think you can calculate from what we've just said, the vast majority is new build. Across the entire programme, 14% are acquisitions, within which we know a proportion of that are right to buybacks, which definitely won't be demolished. What I would say about demolitions is where these homes are being demolished and being replaced, they're being replaced with much more modern homes. Generally, and I see all the planning applications that come through on the state regen schemes, even if the total unit uplift is small, and sometimes, by the way, there are significant uplift in terms of the social rented units, but even if the unit uplift on the social side is small, generally the floor space and the HAB rooms are much larger, and that speaks to the discussion I was having earlier with the chair about family-sized homes. A lot of the time, councils are demolishing 1 and 2 beds and replacing them with larger properties. So
I'm not going to criticise your 21 to 26 programme, because on that programme, what you say there is right. But for 2016 to 23, we've got older rules and older style regens, which often result in a net loss.
But I think not under the current mayor's planning policies or under the requirements that the Sadiq has put in. And what we're seeing generally, as I say, is if you think of affordable housing, if you go beyond just unit numbers, looking at the actual amount of affordable housing in terms of the space people have to live in, the number of bedrooms they have, and you could even take it wider in terms of the quality of the place in which they live. There's a significant improvement, and that's partly as a result of the way the programme's run, including the resident ballot requirement, which ensures that residents say yes, also through the mayor's planning policies as well. But we do have a general principle. As a point of principle, the AHP should be used to support additionality, and that and I think that is reflected through what has been delivered in terms of starts and what is being delivered in terms of completions.
No, sure, and you've since you've been in place, you've made continuous improvements to the policy, the new planning policies, the estate regeneration guidance, the ballot policies. They all came in 2018, and I'm very interested in knowing the difference in benefits between before and after. And I think you should have that data and be able to tell us.
So am I, and actually, it's an area I've asked our housing policy team to do some work on, actually. So I might not be able to answer all of your questions now, obviously, but this is something that our housing policy team are looking at, to look at the comparison between how things are now and how they once were, and that obviously will be a published document once it's ready. It's a quite significant piece of work, so I think we're a little way off publication, but I think that will demonstrate how the mayor's policies on housing and planning have helped us. And let's remember as well, when we're funding stuff, it's not just the planning side in terms of additionality, in terms of an uplift, or at least a maintenance and preferably an uplift in affordable housing and social housing. When we fund the state regeneration schemes, there has to be net additionality.
Sure. I mean, it just seems to me like the outturn of this programme, which
Assembly Member Berry,
can I just finish my point?
Not if you're going to go on much longer, no. So please be quick. Thank you. Can I firstly apologise for the sound in the public gallery? Our technical team are working on it now to see if they can do something about it. We have some young Londoners who've just attended. We don't know what school you're from, but we'd like to say hello anyway. Anyway, you're in that housing committee, and we're talking about the affordable houses programme. So the deputy mayor there, it's his job to deliver as many affordable houses as possible, and he'll tell you that he's done a fine job, and we're testing if he has. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had two brief points. One is a question that somebody asked me, and I very blithely gave them the answer, but I just want to check that this is definitely the case. The right to buy back does what it sounds like on the tin to me, which is that the whole of that allocation of funds goes to buy back properties that previously were owned by councils and are now being bought to come back into public ownership and rented out at social rent, or possibly housing associations. There's not a right to buy back from the private rented sector as such. Am I right in that understanding?
So first, it's only open to councils.
Yes.
And it allows them to buy up either their old stock or any market sale property, actually. So they don't have to have owned the property before. But I think the vast majority of the homes that are bought back will, because they will be on existing estates. But we have funded councils. I think Hounslow, off the top of my head, was one to just go to buy. I think sort of street properties and other flats that perhaps they didn't own before.
Okay, so that is possible.
So that is possible, yes.
Would you be able to send us afterwards, because I don't expect you to have this kind of figures on the top of your head, the details of how many may have been bought that are just sort of street properties that have then come into ownership? Because obviously that kind of adds possibly a different style of property, rather than it necessarily being on an overall envelope of an HRA, Housing Revenue Account funded housing estate.
I can see if we can get you that data if we record it. I don't know if we do, but if we can,
sure.
we will. Yeah.
Thanks very much. The other thing is a sort of forward-looking question. Obviously, we've got the situation at the moment where mortgage rates are going up, and it's becoming difficult it's difficult enough to get into home ownership. So we have private developers in London who've been developing schemes all over the place. When this happened before, I can't remember who was the Prime Minister. It might even have been Margaret Thatcher. We had what became affectionately known as the Humpy package, or to its friends, but it was actually the housing market package, where public funds were used to buy what became an overhang, where developers just had finished developing, entire tower blocks that were never intended for public rent or social rent or affordable rent or anything. They've been planning to sell them. Do you know if the current terms of your deal, if that sort of happened again in the private sector, build sector, would we be able to flex and obviously it mainly assists, developers, but of course it might then also produce a rush of additional probably flats. Would we be able to do that?
Yes, we can, up to a limit. So the government has set a sort of acquisitions limit for sort of off the shelf blocks like that. But I know it's something that quite a few councils are looking at. I mean, I had a meeting with one council a couple of months ago where they were actively looking at taking blocks off a private developer, and I know that other councils are looking at it too. So yes, it's the sort of time to do it, really.
Well, it's quite likely to be the time when we might need to do it, particularly with smaller developers. Thank you, Chair. Those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. Nice and brief. I give you Assemblymember Devonish.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. It's great to see the AM Cooper talking about Mrs Thatcher's days. It brings back good memories for some of us anyway. My first question anyway, Deputy Mayor. In December 2021, you will recall you said to us that 59% of homes under the programme will be completed by the end of March 2023. It's now June it's still June, isn't it, 2023? We're not in July yet, it's June 2023. What's the current percentage of the 116,000 starts that are now finished, please?
Oh, you're not going to make me do maths in a housing committee, are you, Tony? Goodness me. Well, you've got the completion figures, so we can have a quick look down here. So I think the total completed so far, 63,817. So drum roll, please, while you do the maths, Tony.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll move on to my next question. I've got Yeah, I'm not going to do that live on air. What is your current estimate for when all of the 116,000 homes will be completed? That's an easy figure. It's 100%. So on what date will the 100% be met?
As I mentioned earlier, the vast majority will be complete by 2029. 2,700 will complete by 2,700 beyond that will complete by 2032, I think.
Yeah, you're able to break that down and write to us with just specific.
I'm always happy to write. Yeah,
2029 seems quite late, actually.
So, as I said earlier, I think in response to Assembly Member Moema, there was no long stop deadline for completions, and what that meant was we were able to support long-term multi-phase estate regeneration schemes where you have to give partners certainty up front. So that's why.
Okay. The GLA data states that 58,936 homes have been completed during 2016 to 2023. How many of these homes were starts under the previous 16 to 23 programme, and how many, if any, were from a previous programme, please?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah, the GLA data states that 58,936 homes have been completed during Mr. Khan's term, i.e. 16 to 23. How many of these homes were started under the 16 to 23 programme, and how many were starts from the previous programme, i.e. the previous mayor's programme?
I see. Well, so the way that the programme was set up was, in a sense, the previous programme got merged in to the current programme, which is why you have that 2015-16 year included. I might have to pass over to Heather or Tajmina for an answer on the completions point.
Yeah, so the two programmes did merge. So we had the 11-15 programme, and then the 15-18 programme, and then the 16-23 programme. And actually the funding envelope that we had for the 16-23 programme incorporated funding for legacy programmes as well. So that was to finish the completions from previous programmes, but also to pick up the remaining starts on site that were allocated in those. So in terms of actually providing a full breakdown of exactly which homes were funded from the 4.82 billion, which is the AHP money, it's very difficult to do that because it's incorporated within the overall funding envelope. So there may have been an allocation made earlier, but the start on site happened within a year. What we can do is provide you with details of all the starts on site that happened against the 116 target and how many of those have completed to date when we're working on producing that. But in terms of the completions that are happening that started in previous programmes, the funding is all incorporated within the 4.82 billion, which was inclusive of legacy schemes as well.
I think, Chairman, I'm going to ask for a graph to be produced or a graphic that really spells it out clearly. So I think you're absolutely. I appreciate these things aren't easy, but it would be really important for transparency if you can do that. I won't. What I
would add to that, Tony, I think that's partly why when this programme was set up, the government sort of switched the focus from completions to starts, because it was, in a sense, much easier to sort of hold a mayor accountable for starts than completions, because completions could have started previously. Start you can see when it starts, you can look at the mayoral term, and you can hold accountable.
Yeah, no, I won't go back to the famous point that nobody can live in a start, they have to live in a completion. And my final question, I believe, Chairman, Homes England data reports 128,079 starts and 96,337 completions. GLA data reports 116,782 starts and 58,936 completions. No wonder I got these questions. Do you have any sense of why Homes England's completion rate is higher, please?
Yes, because, as I was saying earlier, in London we do far more long-term multi-phase estate regeneration schemes because of the nature of the built environment, because of the land constraints that we have here. there is a lot more estate regeneration and densification, whereas in the rest of England, Homes England is working with partners who tend to be building on brand new sites, as it were, which don't involve demolition, which are not sort of necessarily as multi-phase and long-term in the way that estate regeneration schemes are in London.
And I was just going to finally ask, is there anything you think, bearing in mind you now being both an Assembly member, a chairman of this committee and a deputy mayor, we could do to increase transparency so we don't have to have these lengthy discussions for another term if we're all re-elected on this side of the House in next year? Is there anything on transparency that you would improve personally?
Well, I mean, I think we are pretty transparent. I mean, I'm here now, obviously, answering questions, and we do. I think we're pretty good at providing. When you ask for information, I think we're pretty good at providing you with it when we have it. And you know, I know that you're through the chair, not shy about writing to us, asking for information. What I would say is we don't always hold the information that the Assembly would like, and perhaps not in the way that the Assembly would like. But I'm always open to suggestions about how we can be more transparent. I like to think that we are pretty transparent.
On message as always, Deputy Mayor. I'll leave it there, Chair.
My job, Tony.
Thank you, Assemblymember Devonish. Just to pick up Assemblymember Devinish's point before I bring in Assemblymember Cooper, I don't think we're accusing you of hiding anything, but sometimes we have to dig pretty deep for the data, and I wonder if somebody needs to look at the concept around which data points you deliver, because obviously housing is hugely important to London. There's lots of money involved, and it would help us help you. As it were. We are looking at how, actively looking, and this should be in place for the Q1 reporting, at how we report against the Mayor's programmes, because of course you will know that we've had this huge focus on the 116k target because it's been such a big number. But of course the Mayor delivers affordable housing through a number of other programmes as well, albeit on a smaller scale. So, and this was actually I think it was a recommendation anyway from one of the Assembly's reports that we look at how we report our statistics. So we are going to be ensuring that we do that in what I hope will be a clearer way, so you can see how the Mayor's funding across multiple programmes is delivering affordable homes for London. But what I would just add is, this is not simple. This is quite complex, and it's not that we're trying to be difficult in any way. It's that affordable housing delivery and the funding of affordable housing is genuinely quite complex. As I say, you've got multiple programmes, multiple different funding streams, often different programmes with different requirements attached. So I don't think it's that we're not trying to be difficult. It's just that these things can be quite complex. I accept your point that it's complex. That All Sizes Committee would say it isn't easy, but I think All Sizes Committee would also say that having the data up front means that we can ask more pointed questions and just get to the conclusions much more quickly. But I'll give you Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to follow on from Assemblymember Devinish's point about the Homes England data. And you made an interesting point about greenfield sites, if you like. So obviously, if you start on site and you've got a greenfield site, you can pretty much mobilise everything, get there, get it all in, and you can actually do the completion probably much faster. But if you look at these figures in terms of the percentage nationally of London's population versus the rest of England, London represents 16% of England's population, but in fact has been responsible for 48% of the whole of England's starts. And in terms of completions, London is responsible for 38% of all of the completions as well. So once you start to compare it on the population level, actually Homes England should have overseen 496,000 more starts and should have also overseen an extra 213,000 completions. So do you have a sense why and how, bearing in mind, we're in constrained urban spaces, don't have many greenfield sites, or well, we do have some greenfield sites probably on the edges of London, but then if you look at the figures for what's going on in the outer London boroughs, it's not a lot compared to the Southwarks and the Newhams and the Ealings, if you like. So how is it that we have managed, relative to our population, such a high level of starts and indeed of completions than the rest of the country?
Thank you for making that point, Assembly Member Cooper. That is, I think you're right. That's very striking. I think London does punch above its weight in terms of housing delivery. And if you look at the per capita delivery of affordable housing, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I think that London is delivering about twice as much affordable housing per capita as the next region. I know, obviously, Homes England does all of the other English regions, but you look at it by region, London is by far and away ahead. The other thing I would say is that...
And that's looking at affordable. If we look at new social rented homes compared to the rest of England, where are we there?
It's, so because the Mayor took the decision when the government said you're not allowed to fund social rented housing, of course the team found a workaround, which is funding homes at social rent levels through London Affordable Rent. So yes, London has found a way. I think the other thing I would say, by the way, before I come to the reasons, is that if the rest of the country was delivering council housing at the same rate that London is, then across the whole of the country, including London, 65,000 council homes would have been started last year. So, I think that just shows that where London has trod a different path, we've seen better outcomes for people here. I think that's a benefit of the devolution arrangement, and I think it actually speaks the need for more responsibility and funding to be devolved to the Mayor, because I think that we've shown that where that is devolved, we can deliver, and we can deliver perhaps in a different and better way to the rest of the country. In terms of other things, I think we sort of covered off those relationships that we have, within the area teams, in particular, those very close relationships with our delivery partners, which I think with the best will in the world, you just wouldn't get if it was a sort of much larger organisation covering the whole country. You wouldn't necessarily be able to have, that real laser-like focus on driving forward schemes. And I have to credit our partners as well, and boroughs in particular, both in terms of the borough delivery programmes themselves and in terms of planning and things like that as well, in getting schemes through. I think all of that has contributed to us being, as I said, and as you set out very clearly, Assembly Member Cooper, punching above our weight in terms of delivery.
I mean, I think it's really welcome to make those comparisons, and I think it's really important to make those comparisons bearing in mind the size of London compared to the size of the rest of the country. And I think it's especially important around the social rented chair, just because we know that at that price point in the market, not just in London but elsewhere, that's where the need really is focused. And it would be great to see the rest of the country following in London's footsteps.
Can I add one more thing as well, Assembly Member Cooper, which I should have mentioned, which is what the Mayor's done on planning, because of course we're delivering far more through the planning system as well now. So there's the stuff that we directly fund. There's also, because of the Mayor's threshold approach in planning, 35% on private land, 50% on public land, we've gone from, if you look at by habitable rooms, we've gone from 22% affordable in 2016 to 45% last year on referable schemes. That's an enormous increase, and that's really contributing as well.
And that's really the area of the market where there is the most desperation, because any councillor will have their electronic postbag filled with desperately overcrowded cases of people who can't solve it through home ownership, or they can't afford the private renter sector. So I think it's very welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assembly Member Cooper. A point very ably made. I just wonder how much, what comparison in funding terms. So Assembly Member Cooper made a point about outperforming in one sense, but do we receive a disproportionate amount of funding for the housing we provide in London?
In the 2016-23 programme, London received 50% of the funding. That has sadly reduced in the 21-26 programme to 35% of the funding. But we have to reflect, on the fact that it is more expensive to deliver affordable housing.
I accept your point, but look, 50%, so London versus the whole country, that sort of gives a bit of more context to the very able point that Assembly Member Cooper made. Now, at this point,
but it is important to acknowledge the costs of building in London.
Yes, absolutely accept that. At this point, we'd like to have a 10-minute comfort break for those who need one. So we will be back at 11:13, as my watch says precisely. Thank you. Just like to welcome everybody back to this meeting of the Housing Committee, where we are discussing the AHP programme with the Deputy Mayor and his team. I give you Assembly Member Berry, who will be asking some additional questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my questions are about the budget and the actual money. Can you first of all provide us with an update on the financial position regarding the 2016 to 23 Affordable Homes programme, i.e. where you're at in terms of getting money out of the door, what the eventual profile will be, and where you are in terms of under or overspends?
I might pass over to my colleagues who can answer the budget questions much more detail.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure Tasmina can come in on the detail, but just to say, I mean, it is fully committed.
Yes.
And that was one of the consequences of meeting the target. Tasmina.
Yes, so the 4.82 billion under the 1623 is fully committed. Against that, we are still finalising exactly what the expenditure is to the end of last year. Last year we spent around just over £1 billion on the starts and remaining completions. There will be a commitment going forward as well, and we're just agreeing with the department on the profile of the drawdown on that, because it will depend on exactly when the final completions will happen, and there's a bit of a risk assessment that we need to do just in terms of the funding drawdown.
Excellent. I think we have, through the Budget Committee, previously got a profile that extends quite a long way into the future. So there's obviously ongoing scrutiny that we need to be able to do with that. And getting that snapshot now when you've just finished would be really useful.
Yeah, and that will feed into the GLA budgets as well, because they will form part of the overall drawdown that we have internally as well.
Okay, excellent. And did you over-allocate at all? Because I know that in the past you've over-allocated to begin with in the expectation that some schemes will fall. Is that what you're still doing?
So for the 116 target, of course, you know, to try and hit that number on the nail. To sort of hit that number on the head, you have to do a little bit of over-programming, but that was all fully risk assessed. We did look at funding some additional projects. Of course, where we've had those discussions with partners where there are projects that might be at risk of not delivering within the year, that the allocations on those were always made with the very clear statement that, you know, if they don't meet the parameters, as Tom said before, that, you know, we wouldn't take those allocations forward. So we do have to do some over-programming, particularly in the last year of the programme. But with those allocations, we make very specific caveats in terms of what what the actual drawdown will be, and then we monitor those in terms of the additional milestones that we put in place to make sure that they're on track. So we work really closely with the partners on those specific schemes.
Okay, thank you very much. So we know that you've over-allocated in the expectation that some will come back throughout the programme. Are you able to give us data on the amount of funds that have been returned that you've previously allocated through the programme, both in terms of the actual money involved and the percentage of the funding as a whole? In terms of allocations? Allocations that were then returned,
yes,
if you see what I mean,
I think we can do. I mean, it will take a little bit of work because obviously some of that funding will have been made very early on in the programme, but yes, we should be able to look at the allocations. But just to kind of reiterate, the funding is all allocated, so that's part of the programme management, is that if a scheme doesn't deliver or we don't feel confident and the partner has come to us and said that scheme's not going to deliver, the reallocation of that funding is all part of the kind of overall programme. So we may have some partners who had large allocations at the beginning of the programme, subsequently, because of the strong programme management that we have, reduce down their programme, but that funding is then taken up elsewhere. And that's not a negative thing. You know, we want partners to come to us and tell us realistically that they're not going to be able to draw down this allocation. So we can give you, it may be best to just look at the allocations that were made at the start of the programme and then, you know, where we are with those at the end of the programme. But continually that money will be reallocated.
Yes, and we're just interested in that process and the extent to which things are sort of failing, but not because that's a failing of yours, but because that's a natural part of the system and the risks that people take.
I think the point is a natural.
Can you use your microphone, Tom?
Still switched. Thank you for pointing that out. I think it is a natural part of the system, and over a programme of that length, there are going to be challenges. Some partners are not going to be able to deliver. We can't sort of set stuff in sort of aspect. Not entirely sure what seeing these things, the Assembly seeing these things on sort of per partner basis, how much sort of that would provide any enlightenment really. There are always.
I don't think we need to see it on a per partner basis.
Fine.
Just
no,
overall.
Misunderstood you. Sorry. Yeah. The other thing to say as well, just going back to the point about diversity. Because we worked really hard at bringing in, different partners, a diverse range of partners, smaller partners, councils, etc. That meant that where the partners that had been allocated funding, initially that then couldn't deliver, we were then able to direct that to partners that could.
Yes, exactly. So this is a question for you, I think, Tom. Sort of going forwards from now, you talked earlier on how fierce you were about the 31st of March deadline and how motivating that was to people. If money comes back in, presumably you cannot now allocate that to new build. If you end up with some under allocation as things go on, are you able to use that for things like, for example, the right to buy back fund still? Given that wouldn't be quite the same as going back on your earlier fierceness.
So I wouldn't now expect funding to come back from schemes that have already started. We're seeing those through to completions. Where we do get funding in return to us would be through things like RCGF, which, as you know, is the funding that comes back when people buy or staircase in shared ownership properties. We're actively looking at how we can deploy our sort of unrestricted funds, as it were, strategically. And the Assembly and Londoners will be hearing more about that over the coming months.
Sorry, can you just clarify on that? So money that comes back through staircasing in shared ownership, that then does come back to you?
Yes, the funding comes back to the GLA in London, it goes back to Homes England in the rest of the country.
Right, and so you can use that for innovative things like Right to Buy Back Fund or potentially for other builds?
The requirement is it's spent on affordable housing. But yes, it comes back to the GLA.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. And then you talked earlier on about the innovation and the fact that you were able to use flexibility. And I know from my own work, people have approached me and I've sent them on to you to talk about potentially getting grant for things that are not quite standard. And you've been really helpful and really flexible about that. That kind of flexibility continues into the future on these kinds of schemes.
On which kinds of
sorry, on things that on any returned money that you can spend again, you can continue to be that flexible.
We have more flexibility. Yes, we have flexibility on those funds. We don't have so much flexibility, as you know, on the 21-26 programme because the government have made certain stipulations. But yes, we do have an ability to innovate, and as I say, there's a lot of thought going into how we can be strategic in terms of how that funding is deployed, because obviously it's still a limited pot of funding, and we want to make sure that we are delivering against the Mayor's priorities and maximising the effectiveness of that for London.
Okay, that's really helpful. I mean, we're obviously not expecting it to be a lot, but if you're talking about things like diversity and encouraging new ideas and smaller people to come forwards, then that is potentially a source of funding for them, and that's quite interesting to know about. Also on the flexibility, and I know that you and the GLA team have answered this question before, but I want to push it again. The Memorandum of Understanding with government at the beginning of the 2016-23 programme, you've declined to publish. However, you have commented today that you've managed to negotiate more flexibility out of it. I think that's something we ought to be able to scrutinise, even if it's on a private basis, now, and particularly now that the programme is effectively over. Would you reconsider sharing that MOU with us and any information about new flexibilities you've negotiated?
My only reluctance on that point, because I don't think there are any state secrets within the MOU.
Yeah.
My only reluctance is how it might affect our relationship with DLUC. So what I would say is I would, in the spirit of us, working collaboratively and effectively with DLUC, I wouldn't want to take on this one a unilateral decision. So perhaps I can take that one away, discuss with my colleagues, and discuss with the department.
Okay, that would be really helpful, because I think it's something we ought to be able to see.
Sorry,
and then,
Sian, could I just add in as well? When we had the mayoral decisions on accepting the 1623 programme, it was very explicit in there, the different requirements that were set out in the MOU. So where there was information that we'd agreed with the department that we would share publicly, we have actually put those into the MDs, and then if we've had subsequent changes to those, they're in there as well.
Okay, that is really helpful. Thank you very much. Then a couple of small questions just to finish off. I know you have the separate community housing fund, but did any of the 2016 to 23 funding go towards community-led housing projects in the end? And would you be able to maybe write to us with details of that?
Off the top of my head, I can't say, but I'm sure we can provide you with that.
We don't think that there were, and if so, it'd be a very small number, but we'll look into that.
Thank you very much. And then finally, the Q3 GLA finance report for this year says there was a £1 million revenue overspend in your department in respect of the affordable housing programme, and it says where staffing spend is ahead of funding drawdowns. Can you explain more about that?
I might pass over to Tim and colleagues for this one.
So we are paid in arrears on some of the funding that comes from the department. In terms of the expenditure that I think that's referring to is the staffing costs that we've had. We will have had some reductions in the staffing costs because of vacancies. I think the underspend is more because there's a sort of delay in how that money comes back to us.
So the revenue that comes with the programme comes from DLUC in arrears after you do the work?
Some of the revenue that's generated on the programmes is done after. So we get the capital funding in, and then the revenue, so from interest on that, might be put into the revenue pot, and that's calculated afterwards. So the expenditure is done, we do an accrual for it in the finance records, and then that actual funding gets picked up in the first quarter of the following year.
Okay, so that doesn't represent any kind of debt that the GLA as a whole is going to have to cover. In order to, it's not the rush to finish the deadline that's led to some.
Not on the revenue side. Right. I mean, I don't know the details of exactly what the Treasury management is within the GLA finance team, but because we will have accrued for that, it will be accounted for in terms of money coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the differences between forecast and actuals rather than a real underspend. It all nets off to zero in the end.
Okay, great. Because, yeah, I think if the London Assembly overspent by £1 million, we'd be in terrible trouble. Okay, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. Before I give you Assemblymember Cooper, can I just circle back to a comment made by the Deputy Mayor about a laser-like focus on delivering this programme? But we are now 2 years into the 21-26 programme. You've got £4 billion to spend. You haven't done anything yet. Do you think the laser-like focus on that may put the next programme in jeopardy?
No, I don't accept that at all. I mean, these are two clearly defined and distinguished programs. It made complete sense for us, given the 31st of March 2023 deadline for the 16 to 23 programme, to be very, very focused on getting starts in before the deadline. There are a number of factors outside our control that have affected delivery on the 21 to 26 programme. So first of all, we were delayed by the government getting into contract with partners between the conclusion of the first bidding round and them actually letting us sign contracts. This is something I've said to the committee before. Once we then got to that point of signing contracts, the world changed and partners were looking at their original bids and sort of saying that these are no longer deliverable in the current economic climate. So we worked with the department and with partners to reprofile that delivery. That reprofiling has now concluded, and we are simply waiting now for Michael Gove to sign off on the reprofile programme, and as soon as he's signed off on that, we can get underway with the delivery.
You committed to building 35,000 homes under that project, and I believe at the Budget and Performance Committee, GLA officers said this is likely to be reduced. How many homes are you now expecting to build within this programme, and do you think you would have done better if you started earlier?
So, I mean, to take your second point, as I say, we weren't able to start earlier because, first of all, there was some internal government issues that meant that we simply weren't allowed to sign contracts, and partners can't start delivering homes until contracts are signed. Once the contracts were signed, the world changed, and we undertook, in joint agreement with the department, and Homes England did exactly the same, a reprofile of the scheme. It is going to result, because the reprofiling inevitably means that we need to be spending more per unit because costs have increased. That does reduce the overall amount of homes that we can deliver, although we are pushing very hard for the government to make additional funding to be available to reflect the changed circumstances. We will be publishing our revised figures on this once the Secretary of State has signed off on the reprofiled programme.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to dig in a little bit more into the detail that you are able to provide to us, which is something that we've dug into a few times in some previous meetings. One of the things that we were asking you about, Deputy Mayor, not at the last meeting, but I think the one before that, was about the supported housing targets within the approved housing programme, and I think we established that there was 2,000 was the target. So again, I just wondered why that wasn't made public, because obviously we're here as the Housing Committee to scrutinise. And also, if you agree changes with the government, so for example, the easing of the targets for shared ownership or London living rent, I think that was an agreed change with the department. Again, that change wasn't made public. Are you likely to introduce the possibility, I don't know, on a quarterly basis or annually or something like that, of letting us know in a more timely fashion about changes that are either agreed with the department or targets that, within the overall headline figure? Because it's very helpful for us in terms of our scrutiny.
I can certainly see that, Assembly Member Cooper. I mean, we have to weigh up the fact that anything we sort of say publicly about the programme is kind of market shaping, and it's just, in terms of the information that we put out there at the time, just being clear that we aren't going to create problems for ourselves or partners in terms of delivery, also acknowledging that these are negotiations with the government, so we don't, again, it sort of goes back to the point I was making earlier, we don't want to sort of act unilaterally putting information out there if that then undermines the relationship that we have with the department, because the department say, well, we can't trust you. Obviously, we are clear with the Assembly after the fact, as it were, where these changes have taken place. It's difficult to give a total running commentary, but I certainly take your point. We want to be as transparent as possible. I don't think there was any secret around the targets on specialist and supported housing within the programme. I think we've discussed this a number of times, and again, this is an example of where the department wanted initially a particular target. The market came back and said, well, we just can't deliver on that. So we then have a negotiation about what is achievable, and we've arrived at a much softer target and a lower target reflecting that. And we've discussed the reasons why. In the case of supported housing, it's because of a lack of revenue support. We're working very hard with partners who can deliver supported housing in order to maximise that as much as possible. But as I say, we're not trying to be sort of difficult or secretive. It's just that anything we say publicly can have a relationship with impact on relationship with the department and an impact on partners as well.
No, I think the last thing that we would want to see is something that jeopardises further AHP coming to London, because DLUC is fed up with us because we've unilaterally released more information than they feel comfortable with. But certainly I think something at the last meeting but one that, and we do also understand obviously that the revenue funding for supported and specialist housing impacts on the ability to spend the capital, because there's no point creating a premises if you then can't actually put people in there because you can't pay for the support to go with it. But one thing that did come up was that some of the supported housing was being recorded into the general reporting line, if you recall, under the sort of Homes for Londoners affordable housing programme. And I think we did ask if you could send us, and I think we wrote to you probably, and I think we had a confirmation that, in our letter that we would like that back by the 22nd of May. We've not yet received a response to tell us how much supported housing might have gone into that Homes for Londoners programme.
Was this the 1623 programme you would like the total, or was it looking forward at the 21-26 programme?
I don't know, because I can't remember the precise terms of where we got to, but I would imagine that we would quite like both. Yeah.
We'll have to look into that, because usually we do usually write back within the allotted time frame with answers to questions. So we'll pick that up as something to just double check and get back to you. Just doing
a little chaser there then.
Yeah,
okay.
Fair enough.
we would appreciate that, because obviously the supported housing targets are very important to Londoners who have those additional needs, and therefore where we can deliver it, we want to know about it. Obviously Homes England do publish quite a lot of information about how their programme divides up into various different sub-programmes. And that explains the information that's included within each line of reporting, and also the funds associated with each sub-programme. Now, obviously, we do appreciate that this is something that moves around. Sometimes you agree something with partners. They might have an overall programme of development, and they might sometimes shift things from one line slightly to another. And obviously delivery is so important, so you're going to probably be accommodating around that. But we get some notes from the GLA, but we don't get the same level of detail. Obviously, given that almost half the country's programme is going on in London, that might be tricky. But is there a reason why we're not provided with the same level of information from the GLA as Homes England are able to provide on their sub-programmes, and could we move towards that?
So certainly in the reporting, it does separate out line by line, so it'll include the AHP, and then I think sub parts of that, the housing zones, for example, stuff that's delivered through that. So are you talking about the sort of explanation for what each of these things are within that reporting?
And then the funding that goes with it as well. So
I think we publish, so we certainly publish a unit numbers. I don't think that we have published through the reporting the funding. I wasn't aware that Homes England did that. We could perhaps look at what Homes England do and see if there's anything we can learn from it. I'll pass over to Tajmina.
I think in terms of the funding that's available for the different programmes, because we don't overlap with the funding details that go into the GLA's accounts, a lot of that information is already available within the GLA, either the forecasting accounts or the end-of-year account. So there should be financial breakdowns in there of what the funding is for the different programmes, including what's been spent and then our forward forecasts for those programmes. Unlike Homes England, who don't have to obviously publish accounts, they use the funding for each programme and they put it into their outturn report. But because we don't do the overlap with GLA finance reports, we keep them separate. In terms of the programmes...
Would you be able to combine them, though? Or would that...
We would be repeating the information that are produced in the GLA accounts, and the GLA accounts are obviously audited and signed off, so we could reference them. We can reference, perhaps put links into the report to show that if you want to see the funding side of things, this is where is where to go to.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that. In terms of the unit delivery, Homes England is more restricted than the GLA in terms of what they can do with programmes. So, for example, under the AHP 1623, they will put all of their projects through that. Within the GLA, because of the flexibilities that the panellists, the group here has talked about, where we can introduce new programmes, we can introduce new initiatives. So, for example, Building Council Homes for Londoners is a very specific initiative that we've launched. We've, had a very clear focus on what that's for. But the funding actually comes from the AHP 1623 programme. It's a subset of that. So in the past, where we have split the programmes into those different delivery lines, there are actually individual details within an overall funding pot that Homes England don't do. They don't sort of flex their programmes as much as we do. I think we can look at producing more helpful breakdowns of the programme, but there's a lot there. The right to buy ring fence, for example, is another subset of the Building Council Homes programme, which is already a subset of the AHP 1623. So it can get quite complicated, but I can have a look at producing something more.
We appreciate that, and we also appreciate the flexibility, because delivery probably is even more important than us being able to scrutinise, in terms of, for most Londoners, that's actually going to be the thing that really makes a difference. One of the things that we've also talked about is bedroom number reporting, and I think you explained at the last meeting but one that is now going to be mandatory for the 21-26 AHP. Will it be possible to share the data that the GLA holds on bedroom numbers for the AHP 16 to 23? And I'm very happy that anybody answers that question. I don't know whether that's going to be possible.
We've certainly shared the information that we have for 1623 on multiple occasions. As you'll be aware, Assembly Member Boff, who's sadly no longer on this committee, was always very interested in this topic and asked written questions quite regularly. So yes, we've got the data, and I'm aware that we shared it quite recently in relation to the Building Council Homes for Londoners programme. It's not complete for 1623 because it wasn't mandatory, but that information is available and can be shared.
Well, we'd like the maximum. Assemblymember Boff, of course, has just gone viral, proving his credentials as my new best friend to 250,000 people who've been looking at his method of delivering his friendship on social media.
I'll have to check that when we're out of the committee, Leonie.
Yes, we will.
Absolutely. It was.
Assemblymember Boff goes viral. That's.
Yeah, it wasn't. It didn't do him any good at all, actually, unfortunately. The 21-20, to judge from other people's comments, not mine. The 21-26 programme, obviously, we've referred to this a bit, is no longer going to suffer from the fixed unit grant problem that was imposed by central government for each home, which has led, I think, in terms of, it's in many ways a sort of force us towards smaller units, smaller dwellings. Do you think the government has taken... do you know why the government has taken that decision? Why have they decided to go down that route? And do you think that flexibility, I'm assuming that it will allow for the development of more family-sized accommodation, so 3 and 4 bed homes? Is that likely?
So I think the reasoning, and I'll bring colleagues in this as well, but I think the reasoning behind that change of approach was about value for money. And ensuring that we were delivering value for money. And so it does allow partners, though, to bid for what they need on a particular scheme. And if a particular scheme has a high proportion of 3+ bed family size homes, partners can put in a bid that reflects that. But I will pass over to colleagues to see if they've got anything to add on that.
The only thing I would say is that in the recently launched refugee housing programme, the government have recognised that much larger properties cost quite a lot more in London in particular.
No,
and
really?
so we can...
I mean, who knew? That's they've just noticed that. I mean, that's
so we hope, obviously, if partners are able to deliver that successfully and bring 3 and 4 bedrooms in particular to the market, that we can use that data to continue to make that case.
I mean, we've had some properties in my own constituency where, the local authority has had them in ownership and they've been a 4-bedroom property and they've then extended them to 5 or 6 beds. And, of course, in terms of making economic sense for housing a large family out of bed and breakfast or the private renter sector, surely it makes sense, doesn't it, to have these larger properties? So the value for money argument is surely very clear.
Absolutely. And as a point, I mean, I was asked recently in relation to the refugee housing programme by Borough whether they could acquire properties and extend them. And yes, I think that would be a fantastic way of delivering larger homes that we need.
Well, the next time we have a housing plenary, I look forward to discussing these matters, hopefully not too interrupted by Assemblymember Boff. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
In defence of Assemblymember Boff, I think that's passion you're sensing there. He's very passionate about housing for Londoners. Assemblymember Berry, do you still want to do your supplementary? OK, thank you. Let's go on to Assemblymember Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to the panel. Oh, it's still morning, actually. Wow, this is
still morning.
Still morning.
16 minutes left. Yeah.
I'm just building on the points made by Assemblymember Cooper in regards to reporting and forecasting. And although we've had specifics, I kind of wanted to take a step back and talk about it more broadly. So obviously we had some feedback from the National Audit Office in terms of the quality of GLA reporting on the AHP, looking back across the 2016-23 programme as a whole. And I know you've already sort of spoken to this a little bit, Deputy Mayor, but I'd like you to reiterate, which is, do you feel the GLA has provided reasonable transparency in reporting throughout, and what has been the challenges in reporting during this programme?
Yes, so to be clear, the National Audit Office report was actually very helpful, and we've been working with the department to address some of the issues that they highlighted during that. And I think that's led to some positive changes, which my colleagues will be able to talk about in a bit more detail. But just to be clear, the GLA reported to DLUC in line with the memorandum of understanding that we had with them. So we were reporting exactly as we were required. In fact, there was a moment when we switched over our systems from the investment management system to the ops system. We did ask them proactively if we could look at our reporting with a view to strengthening that, but they said no, we want you to report in line with the memorandum of understanding. So I think on the GLA side we have been doing what was expected of us, but as I say, the NAO report was very helpful, and it's fair to say that the reporting that we do has increased, and I'll pass over at this point to my colleagues to talk about that.
Others will be able to give a bit more detail, but just to say that the work that the NAO was doing was very much the subject of quite a lot of focus between the GLA and the DLUC teams just as I was coming into post last July. And throughout that, I think even before that, but throughout the period following that, there's been a real focus between the two teams on seeking to get to a position where we're absolutely providing the information that DLUC needs to be able to scrutinise the spend by the GLA effectively. And I think we've got to a point where both teams feel like the information provided is proportionate and doesn't get in the way of delivery, as has been mentioned, which was our real focus over the last year. And most importantly, I think there's been a massive focus on risk to the programme and mitigations, and we've had some really, really good discussions with DLUC colleagues, with Treasury colleagues in the room, and with colleagues from the Infrastructure and Projects Authority as well. And the comment from the IPA has been that the real focus on risk and mitigations, realistic mitigations, was one of the reasons why we were able to meet that target when we really didn't think we were going to be able to. So the relationship has been very positive and productive, and we've been working together on a joint understanding of how improvements to reporting should be taken forward. I don't know whether Heather wants or Tajmina wants to add any specifics.
I mean, maybe before you do that, I'll just add an additional question, because that was really helpful. Thank you. And I just maybe want to drill down a little bit to, I'm really pleased that the relationship is becoming increasingly productive, and you're, collaborating in terms of how to have the most effective form of reporting. But as the Deputy Mayor said, there were initially some issues highlighted, and we are taking steps to overcome them. So if you could just elaborate a little bit on what those issues are and specifically what's being done to overcome them. Thank you.
Some of this is before my time, so I'm slightly looking.
Sorry, I can pick that up. So there was the key area was around that the NAO criticised the department on was around the funding. So the GLA can only operate with the department in terms of what's set out for the requirements that they want from us. So we provided the department with exactly the information that they need. I think the issue is where they have then put that into the memorandum of understanding in terms of what they would be paying the GLA. So for the 4.82 billion, it's very clear in the payment profile that the department gave to the GLA that they would give the GLA all of that funding to the end of March 2023. Clearly that isn't then covering for payments that would happen in the future to cover completion. So the GLA is restricted in we can only provide them with the information that they request from us, because they are also governed by, it's a national programme, so they have to make sure that they have the same information from Homes England. So I think in terms of that criticism, that was very much based on the department's way of looking at how the payments would be made to the GLA. We were very open with them in terms of the remaining completions that would happen beyond the 2023 programme, and in fact we would provide them with forecasts of that as well. I think just in terms of the other detailed areas that the report highlighted was around contingency plans and risks to the programme delivery. Tim has mentioned that the risk assessments, all of that was done internally within the GLA, because that's what we do in terms of making sure everything is delivering and always having a look ahead to see how the targets are being achieved. The department didn't have the equivalent programme level risk report or issues report, and they have introduced that certainly in the last year. All of our board reporting, the board meetings that we have with DLUC include very clear risk and issues that we raise with them. There was also work around DLUC and Treasury in terms of providing additional flexibilities on the programme. And whilst we've incorporated that into the 21-26 programme, which would allow us to do some flexible arrangements with the department with prior agreement on how much we can draw down, it is still limited. And of course, we'd continue to have those discussions with the department. But they have agreed with Treasury that they would allow some additional flexibility at year end. And then in terms of the other area that the report focused on was around transparency and annual reporting on what the programmes are doing and the evaluation of those programmes. And we have incorporated that into our reviews as well. Again, we were doing that internally, but we're now sharing that information with the department. And we've just recently provided quite a lot of detail to the department in terms of their annual review of the affordable housing programmes 21-26, but also the 16-23 programme as well.
Thank you. That was really informative, and it sounds like DLUC need to be clearer on what they require. And actually, it's been really helpful for the GLA to offer that feedback and guide them on that. Yeah. So I can see why that relationship has been so productive. I'll build on the point around transparency. So my next question is about obviously the NAO. In its scrutiny of DLUC, or the Homes England programme, has access to papers such as board papers of the programme, documentation from Homes England, like strategic bidding and forecast projections. Now, part of the reason why the and the relationship with the Assembly and the AHP is that we are supposed to sort of undertake the scrutiny that perhaps the NOA would do for the Homes England programme, but we don't have access to the same documentation, partly because of what the Deputy Mayor has explained about not wanting to shape the market and it being commercially sensitive. But do you think this maybe leaves a bit of a scrutiny vacuum, or do you think and there's anything that we need to be doing to overcome that, if there is?
I think it's difficult for that information to be placed in the public domain for the reasons that you set out. You know, there has to be a mechanism by which GLA and DLUC can engage in discussions about the programme. There has to be a forum for that. So I don't think it would be possible or desirable actually in terms of delivery of the programme for that for sort of a running commentary to be given, as it were. I do appreciate the sort of the kind of what you've set out there in terms of the NAO being sort of a body that's responsible for scrutinising national government rather than the mayor. But I think, you know, the performance of the GLA was captured in terms of the work that the NAO was doing on this particular issue.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone want to add anything? Tim?
Well, I suppose just by way of an example about some of the commercial sensitivities that we're operating within, you know, one of the key discussions we were having with DLUC across the autumn and into the early part of 2023 was around the fact that the market was changing so much and costs were increasing so much, and one of the key flexibilities that we wanted to agree with DLUC was the ability to offer additional grant in some cases, but we were also very focused on achieving value for money in the programme, and we wanted to really minimise that additional grant as much as possible. But we absolutely couldn't discuss that flexibility in any way in the public domain, otherwise it would have just led to a rush of requests for increased grants. So it's just very difficult to manage those kinds of commercial sensitivities.
No, thank you, Deputy Mayor and Tim. I think that's actually a really robust explanation, and I think definitely meets the answer. Just on my final question, so this is about the GLA's evaluation of the 2016-23 programme. If you could just offer some explanation about when this will be completed and at what point you would imagine that evaluation becoming public.
Yes, we are working on a sort of lessons learned, and I think there's going to be some because of the excellent performance of the programme, some wider lessons for the whole of the GLA and in terms of delivery. This is an internal review. I don't think we've discussed sort of making the sort of that public. That's a sort of discussion we would have to have amongst ourselves. As Tajmina mentioned, we're also working with the department on their annual review for the previous year.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll pass back over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we go to Assembly Member Berry, can I just go back about this thing about transparency and the data provided? The Deputy Mayor made a comment very early on in the meeting about devolution and the accuracy in which things could be delivered because it's the devolved authority. I think many of us on the committee and in the Assembly in general would agree. but surely greater transparency between yourselves and ourselves would aid that argument, because no government's going to give more and more devolution with this lack of scrutiny seen from one angle. So what would your response be to the idea that providing us with better information to scrutinise you better, and some of that information might have to be confidential, would aid any argument for devolution?
I mean, first of all, it's all very well saying that information will be confidential. I remember Tim's predecessor, Ricardo, did write to the Assembly with some information and specified that it should be kept controversial because it was market-shaping information, and the Assembly went ahead and published it. That's because I think of the Assembly's commitment to transparency. So the first thing I would say is I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Particularly, where information that we'd asked to be controversial was asked to be confidential was then placed into the public domain. We do want to be as transparent as possible, but there are inevitably going to be things that can't be shared because they're commercially confidential, because ultimately sharing them before the fact would undermine delivery. But we're very happy, and this is why I'm sitting here now and why we're all sitting here, to be scrutinised about the decisions that the Mayor has taken post the fact, when they aren't going to be market shaping, and the job of the Assembly is to do that scrutiny of the Mayor and to say, well, why did you take this particular decision? How has it affected delivery? Was it positive or was it negative? We've got to have that balance between us being as transparent as we'd like to be with you, but protecting delivery. And I think of it as well a bit like parliamentary select committees will scrutinise the department, for example. And I'm sure there are things that ministers can't share because they're commercially confidential with the Luck Select Committee. In Parliament, I imagine it's quite similar, but they have a job of scrutiny to do as well.
I agree with you to a point, but it feels like a level of trust, doesn't it? Because there will always be that tension, and I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to figure out that tension. But it feels like to us that there's the balance hasn't been achieved. If you look at the Police and Crime Committee, for instance, they're often privy to very sensitive information, which they have traditionally been able to keep entirely to themselves. And I believe if this committee was trusted to that level, it would reward you by keeping those things secret, but also allowing us and you to deliver more transparently in the overall for Londoners, and more effectively, I'd argue as well. Tim, you seem to come in.
Well, I just wanted to kind of really offer, as well as Tom's commitment, my own commitment. As a GLA officer, I'm absolutely committed to us being as transparent as we possibly can with the committee, and to taking opportunities to provide additional information where in discussion with the committee we think that would be beneficial. I think there is an opportunity with the 21 to 26 programme. It's a slightly different, being reported in a different way. I think there are opportunities for us to refresh the information we provide. We're very much looking at that at the moment, so to make sure we take that opportunity, but really happy to work with committee officers on what additional information would be helpful. But yeah, absolutely committed to doing everything we possibly can in that space, subject to the caveats that Tom's explained.
We thank you for that, because this committee, for all its goings on politically, we are focused on helping you help Londoners, so we're happy to have that sentiment echoed by you. Assembly Member Berry.
Yeah, well, on a similar theme, but more related to evaluation, which was the subject of the last question. I think, now this programme's over, as it were, and there's very little money still to allocate, and it'll be small bits and pieces. We do have a duty to learn from it and to do so in public. And I'm disappointed to hear that you're going to do an internal review, that you describe it as lessons learned, because what I'd love us to be able to do is a look at the costs and benefits of funding, comparing funding different tenures, comparing acquisitions, like you said, Tom, comparing demolition and rebuild like for like with demolition rebuild at a larger unit size. Those are different things to compare the costs and benefits of. And
Sounds like an interesting subject for an Assembly scrutiny.
Getting stuck into that would be useful. But we have this mind where we can't get the information we need in detail to do our own evaluation. And yet you're saying you're also not going to release your own evaluation. I think we're going to have to square this somehow. in order to learn about what's best to fund in future. We all need to know that.
I'm open to having a discussion about what we can put into the public domain on this. I mean, what I said was it is an internal review. That's how it's being done. But let's take that away and see what we can provide you on a transparent basis.
Yeah, because potentially you could give us information that we only release our findings, not the actual information, or tell us your findings.
To repeat what I said sort of in relation to something else, within the review, I'm not sure there'll be any state secrets. I imagine a lot of things that are contained in it in terms of its findings will be things that you've heard already today in terms of how the programme was managed. And the work that was done, but we can have a discussion about that.
You've definitely not mentioned cost-benefit analysis today.
Oh yes, that's an important point.
Thank you for the answer. I'll give you Assembly Member Devonish.
Well, as Andrew Boff's been mentioned several times, poor Andrew's ears must be burning. I thought I'd better...
miss him, Tony. I miss him.
Well, you can come to our group meeting afterwards if you really miss him. Probably not.
Haven't I suffered enough already, Tony?
There you go. That will be an office.
Can we all come?
I'll sit you next to Susan Hall if you misbehave.
She seems to be misbehaving somewhat less than certain other individuals, but we won't mention them.
Thank you very much.
I knew it would be Assembly Member Cooper that got political.
Awful.
What a surprise.
Comment. Let me just ask my question anyway.
Surely not. I never am.
Andrew, if he was here, would be asking you, of course, about family-sized housing. For the second programme, the new programme, the 21-26 programme, do you think there's going to be more as a proportion of family-sized housing and larger flats than there were in the first programme, or less?
I mean, it's very difficult for me to make a prediction on that front. What I would say is the way that the funding is set up does allow partners to bid for what they need, and therefore if they're delivering home schemes with larger homes, they can bid for the funding for that. So my instinct would be that it would allow more, but I can't make a hard and fast prediction on that front at this stage.
You've not had any guidance from the Mayor then that he would like more larger flats and family-sized housing?
Well, we know we need more family-sized housing, and it's something that's very important to us, but we work within a particular funding envelope. What I'm saying to you is I think that the way that this funding is being allocated to partners in terms of it not having sort of the fixed tariff rates would make it easier for them to deliver larger homes. But it's difficult to make a prediction.
I think there's a mayoral question there. Thank you, Chair.
Go for it.
Thank you. I think this discussion has shown us that I genuinely believe you are trying to be open with us, but we have a number of questions that we think could routinely be asked in the way in which you release your data and the type of data you release. And I think as a committee, we would like to be part of your considerations for what you release, when and how, because a piece of data is powerful at a particular time, and some of the data we receive feels incomplete and sometimes not timely, which makes our job much harder. So part of our recommendations, we will have. I don't suppose you'll accept them all, but we'll have a definite direction of travel.
We will consider them all carefully,
and I'm sure you will. I genuinely believe you will. But we would like to, in some senses, get that data so we could deal with it without the sort of political argy-bargy and just get to the point. But listen. That brings us to the end of today's meeting. I would like to thank our guests for the time they've given us and the way you've approached the answers. I'm genuinely impressed with A, your knowledge, and B, your openness in approaching the questions. So we'd like to thank you for that. We have a few items of business which you can stay and listen, but I release you to the wild. I'm sure you have things that you'd rather do than listen to us. So again, thank you for your attendance. To the committee, can we note the committee's work programme?
Noted.
The date of our next meeting of the committee is...
Aren't we supposed to note the discussion held and the answers given? And sorry, Chair.
Wow. Any opportunity to show Sean up, I'm sure. Look, can we also delegate...
No, because if there's anything that arises from it, we do need to formally note it. That's the only reason I mention it. Sorry, Chair.
Okay, no backseat driving.
No disrespect.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in conclusion with the party group leads to agree any output arising from this discussion?
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
Can we note the work programme?
Noted.
Yeah, right. The date of the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 19th of July 2023 at 2 p.m. in the chamber in City Hall. I have no urgent business. I declare this meeting closed. You are welcome.
Thank you. Leo, your hand.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2.
Good luck.
Good luck. Well, I've switched that on. And over there's a little symbol on there saying it. We can't hear it, so we'll let you know in the group chat what the situation is. Yeah, I don't know if anyone can hear me in the gallery. There is a little thing showing on the bottom of the actual unit itself, but I can't actually hear it in the room, so